Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into a source that offers a very specific perspective on this whole idea of waiting.
Right, and what happens when you engage in it, according to this text?
Yeah, our source material, it's actually an outline from a religious message. It's called Waiting on the Lord to Soar Like Eagles.
And it leans heavily on biblical texts, primarily the book of Esther. You'll see that a lot, but also Isaiah, Psalms, Lamentations, 2 Kings. Quite a mix.
So our mission for this deep dive is really just to explore this specific message, right? As it's presented in the outline.
Exactly. We're taking its points, understanding its structure, and just seeing what insights it offers, strictly from its viewpoint, based only on the text we have.
And the core idea, it seems to be this direct link between what the source calls waiting on the Lord and, well, getting through major crises or seeing big positive changes.
It uses those Bible stories as the main examples, the illustrations.
So for you listening, our goal is to understand what this particular outline is saying about these things and maybe what takeaways you could draw from its specific perspective.
Precisely. Let's jump in where the message starts the story, setting the scene.
Okay, so the source takes us right into the book of Esther, and immediately it paints a pretty serious picture. A crisis.
Yeah, it describes the situation right after this terrible decree goes out from the king against the Jewish people. The source pulls from Esther chapter 4.
And it highlights the reaction everywhere, like great mourning among the Jews and fasting and weeping and wailing.
And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. It really conveys this profound national despair.
And Mordecai, he's a key figure here. He kind of embodies this intense reaction, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The source describes him wrenching his clothes, putting on sackcloth and ashes, going out into the city.
Crying with a loud and a bitter cry.
Yeah, and it even notes, the severity of it. He couldn't even enter the king's gate dressed like that in sackcloth.
It really underscores how desperate things looked from their perspective. But what's interesting is how fast the source puts its own interpretation on it. Right after describing all this weeping and wailing, the outline just asserts that this state is temporary. It says, quite confidently, that triumph, victory, joy, gladness, and promotion will come at the end.
So even while describing the absolute depths of despair, the source is immediately saying, hold on, this isn't the end of the story.
Exactly. It sets up that expectation right away. There's a positive turn anticipated, and it seems linked to this very situation.
The opening establishes the crisis, but the message flips immediately to the outcome it expects.
Right.
Okay, so if that's the scene, this deep distress, how does the message say they get from there to the promised triumph?
Well, this brings us to the core action the source focuses on,
right?
Waiting.
But, and this seems crucial based on the outline, it's not presented as just sitting around passively. That's a really key distinction this source makes, It details this waiting through Esther's response when she finds out about the decree.
What does she do?
She tells Mordecai, "Gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day."
Wow, 3 days and nights, no food or water, that's intense.
It is, and she adds this incredibly powerful personal commitment, right? "I also, and my maidens, will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king. And if I perish, I perish."
That line, "if I perish, really sticks with you. The source also points out her leadership here, doesn't it?
It does. It notes she wasn't a do as I say, but not as I do kind of person. She joined the fast herself.
So this communal, personal fasting, this is the act of waiting, according to the source.
It's presented that way, yes. As the method, the embodiment of it.
Yeah.
And the outline explains the purpose behind it. Which it was done because they were basically not knowing what to do, but they were trusting, positioning themselves for specific things like revelation, wisdom, courage, strategy, and breakthrough.
So it's waiting, but it's active. It's seeking something.
Exactly. And what I find interesting is how the source then broadens this idea. It doesn't just stick with Esther's fasting.
Right. It brings in other examples.
Yeah, other biblical examples where crying out, weeping before God are shown as part of this same process.
Like the Psalms.
Yes, it pulls from several Psalms. Psalm 39.02 is in there. "Hear my prayer, give ear unto my cry, hold not thy peace at my tears."
That direct appeal.
And Psalm 56, verses 6 to 8, where it says, "God tells your wanderings." And then that famous line, "He puts your tears in your bottle."
Tears in your bottle. That's such a striking image from the source. It suggests God is really noticing, valuing these emotions.
That seems to be the message, That God is attentive, remembers these expressions of sorrow during the waiting. It also brings in Lamentations.
Lamentations. What does that highlight there?
chapter 2, verses 18 to 19, it speaks about crying out to the Lord like a river day and night, pouring out your heart like water, especially for your children. And the source actually uses this specific reference to make a point about praying and crying out for young people today rather than just criticizing them. So it applies the principle.
Interesting application. And then there's the Hezekiah story too, right?
Yes, a very powerful one from 2 Kings, chapter 20. King Hezekiah is critically ill. The prophet Isaiah tells him straight up, "You're gonna die."
That's about as direct as it gets.
Right. And the outline notes what Hezekiah does. He turns his face to the wall, prays, and weeps sore. Just weeps bitterly.
And the outcome?
The outcome, as the source really emphasizes, is that God responds directly to this prayer and these tears. The message quotes God's reply. "I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee."
Wow.
And God adds 15 years to his life and delivers the city from an enemy threat.
So the source is weaving these together. Esther's fasting, the Psalms' cries, Jeremiah's weeping and lamentations, Hezekiah's tears.
To build its definition of what waiting on the Lord actually involves, it's active. It involves, according to this message, crying, weeping, fasting.
And the assertion is, God hears this, God sees this, and it leads to answers.
That's the clear message. It leads to answers, reversals of bad situations, breakthroughs. The source even states it directly as a key takeaway here. There is a blessing in waiting upon the Lord.
It frames it as this intentional posture, these specific actions that yield results, at least within the framework of this particular message.
Precisely. And this whole section kind of builds up to bringing in that foundational promise from Isaiah 40.31, the one that's right in the title of the message.
The soaring like eagles part.
Exactly. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint."
So that's the ultimate promise the source connects to this specific kind of active, tearful, prayerful waiting. Renewed strength, soaring above it all.
That's the connection it makes, yes. Linking the waiting to soaring.
Now, to really drive home the importance of this path, the source does something interesting to contrast this outcome with what happens to the main villain in the Esther story.
Right. It shifts focus sharply over to Haman, the man who cooked up the whole genocidal plot against the Jews in the first place.
How does it describe him?
Well, initially, he's feeling pretty pleased with himself. He got invited to Esther's private banquet. But that joy quickly turns sour.
Why?
Because of Mordecai again. Haman is filled with indignation against Mordecai simply because Mordecai won't bow down to him. Such arrogance.
So Haman goes home fuming. And the source points out he gets some bad advice there.
Very bad advice. It calls it wrong counsel from his wife and friends.
Which was?
Build a massive gallows, 50 cubits high, that's like 75 feet. Specifically to hang Mordecai on it the next morning.
Good grief.
And the source comments directly, "This advice became his undoing."
Okay, and this is where the story takes that famous dramatic turn, isn't it? The source presents this as a key intervention.
Absolutely. The king can't sleep one night, just randomly calls for the royal chronicles, the records, to be read to him.
And this seemingly random event
Reveals that Mordecai, way back when, had actually saved the king's life from an assassination plot. And crucially, he'd never been rewarded for it.
Talk about timing. And just then,
Haman shows up at the palace court, early in the morning. He's there specifically to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai on his brand new gallows.
but the king speaks first.
Right. Before Haman can say a word, the king asks him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?"
And Haman, blinded by ego,
Instantly assumes the king is talking about him. So he lays out this incredibly lavish public ceremony, royal robes, the king's horse, a crown paraded through the city.
thinking it's all for him.
Exactly. And the source just highlights the stunning reversal. The king commands Haman, "Go, do all of that for Mordecai the Jew."
Oof. The man he was about to ask permission to hang.
The very same man. The source notes, Haman has to lead Mordecai on the horse through the city, proclaiming his honor, and then goes home afterwards, mourning.
Even his own wife and friends see the writing on the wall then, don't they?
They do. They tell him, "Look, if Mordecai is Jewish, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him." The source sums it up perfectly. The tables turned.
And Haman's final end, as described by the source.
He ends up being hanged on the very same gallows he had built for Mordecai.
The irony is thick.
Absolutely. And the source concludes this part by saying Haman's evil plots became his own undoing.
But the source doesn't stop there, does it? It takes Haman's downfall and draws a broader sort of theological point from it.
Yeah, it does. It uses his fate to talk about eternal consequences for unrepentant enemies. It brings in Hebrews 9:27.
After this, the judgment.
Right. And also Revelation 14, verses 10 and 11, which talk about torment and having no rest.
And how does the source connect these?
It interprets them to mean that, quote, unrepentant sinners who die in their conspiracy against God's people will spend eternity in pain and sorrow.
Wow. So that's presented as the ultimate contrast to the outcome for those who wait. This is weeping without any hope of liberation.
And that's exactly how the outline frames it. Haman's specific fate is linked to this broader principle based on how the source reads those verses. It's a very stark contrast.
So the message lays out these two clear paths in the story. One path, through that act of waiting we talked about, leads to triumph, soaring even.
While the other path, marked by plotting against God's people, leads to total downfall and, in this source's view, eternal consequences.
It's a sharp distinction the source uses to really emphasize the significance of the choices being made.
Definitely.
Okay, let's swing back then. We've seen the contrast. What about the positive outcomes? What happens after Haman is dealt with, according to the source's telling?
Well, the source describes it as a time of wonders, following that earlier period of supplication, the waiting, the crying out.
So what are these wonders?
First, after Haman's execution, the king gives Haman's entire house, his estate, to Queen Esther.
Okay.
And she, in turn, immediately puts Mordecai in charge of it all.
So a huge reversal of fortune for Mordecai already.
Just the beginning. His position and status are completely transformed. The source quotes Esther chapter 8.
What does it say?
It describes Mordecai leaving the king's presence dressed in royal apparel, wearing a great crown of gold, garments of fine linen and purple. I mean, total elevation.
The source's summary is pretty direct, isn't it?
Yeah. Mordecai was honored and exalted. Simple as that.
And what about the Jewish people? What was the impact on them?
According to the source, it was massive. It quotes Esther 8 again, saying they experienced light and gladness and joy and honor.
Sounds like a celebration.
It was. They marked it with a feast and a good day. The source highlights that the whole capital city, Shushan, rejoiced. And significantly,
yes,
many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them.
Wow, that's a major shift. People converting out of fear or maybe respect.
The source links it directly back. It says their time of tears was over and attributes their promotion, their turnaround, to heaven intervening.
And Mordecai's final position, does the outline mention that?
It does. It notes he becomes next unto King Ahasuerus, second in command, basically. Hugely influential among the Jews, accepted by them, and working for their well-being, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace.
So the source pulls a major conclusion from all this, right? About that initial death decree.
Yes. It states that the seemingly irreversible edict against the Jews just became null and void, and the people who were marked for total destruction were all preserved without exception.
And it attributes this to
the power of the God of heaven, who is able to change even the supposedly unchangeable laws of men.
And crucially, all these amazing outcomes, the reversal, the honor, the preservation, the joy, the source, ties them directly back to that concept from the beginning.
Explicitly, it says these wonders came from waiting upon the Lord. That's the direct connection it makes.
And it brings back the Isaiah promise again here.
Yes, Isaiah 40.31, renewing strength, mounting up with wings as eagles, is brought back right here in the context of this victory and transformation actually happening.
The source also seems to gather up a few other biblical promises at the end to reinforce this idea of positive outcomes for those who wait, those it calls God's people.
It does, yeah. It quickly lists several verses to bolster the point. There's Jeremiah 31.11.
What's that one about?
About the Lord redeeming and ransoming his people from someone stronger than he. The source interprets this for the listener, saying your situation can change, you can be better and greater today.
Okay, what else?
Zechariah chapter 2, verses 5 and 8. This promises God will be a protective wall of fire round about, and his glory will be within his people. And that touching them is like touching the apple of his eye. So, divine protection.
That's a strong image too, apple of his eye.
It is. Then there's 2 Timothy 4.18, which says, the Lord will deliver from every evil work and preserve people unto his heavenly kingdom. The source links this to deliverance and promotion.
And one more, right? From Psalms.
Yes, Psalm 30, verse 5. Probably the most famous one here. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning.
A classic line of hope.
And the source presents this directly to the listener as a promise of your coming, morning of joy, gladness, exaltation.
So, if we pull the whole message of this source together, it seems to argue that through this specific kind of waiting, active, involving fasting, crying, praying, the people in the Esther story went from the brink of destruction
to reigning, basically. From mourning to joy, enemies defeated, and these incredible wonders happen.
And the message concludes by saying this whole experience, transformation, deliverance, exaltation, is available to those it identifies as God's chosen people.
That's the concluding assertion based on the narrative it's presented.
Wow. That was quite a journey through this specific outline. We tracked it all the way from that initial crisis and weeping
through its definition of active waiting, fasting, crying, praying.
Then contrasting that with Haman's fate.
And finally arriving at the wonders and exaltation presented as the result of that waiting.
The mechanism laid out in this message is pretty clear, isn't it? These outcomes are explicitly linked back to waiting upon the Lord through those specific actions.
Yes, the connection is direct and repeated throughout the source material. Fasting, crying out, praying, these are presented as the keys to the turnaround.
And it's good to remember, as the source material itself noted, this was an outline from a specific religious message by Pastor Dr. W.F. Kumuyi. We've really focused just on unpacking what that text itself conveys.
Indeed. Our aim was just to accurately represent the points and the interpretations that are right there in this specific outline we examined.
Okay. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, building on the perspective we've explored today from this source. This outline defines waiting, not as just passively hoping, but as these tangible actions: fasting, praying, shedding tears, crying out.
Right, very active components.
So, considering this message's framework, what does this presentation of an active, maybe even physical or emotional form of waiting suggest about the path to getting free? Specifically from the viewpoint laid out in